Good evening. Welcome. I am Lisa Thompson, Assistant Professor of Homiletics here at Union Theological Seminary. Well, thank you. Historically, Union is not simply a world-class institution of higher learning. It is a place where ideas are forged and movements are built. And this is a part of the legacy that we seek to push forward tonight with events such as these. Tonight's event is part of Faith in America series, launched in the fall of 2016. This monthly forum gathers faith leaders, academics, public intellectuals, activists, and civic leaders to dive deeply into current events and social movements for the sake of building roadmaps to social change. Taking a closer look at times like these is significant because of the way in which our media cycles constantly reloop, feed the loop, and reloop. Issues fall onto the frame quickly and fall off of the frame very quickly. Looking ahead just a bit to foreshadow before we start tonight's event, the final Faith in America event of 2016-2017 school year will be held on April 20th and will feature visiting Union professor, president of repairs of the breach and founder of the Moral Mondays movement, the Reverend Dr. William Barber, for a program entitled In Search of a Moral Revolution of Values. And anyone who knows Reverend Barber from afar or more distant knows that he is a dynamic figure in the social justice movement, and this will surely be an exciting evening that you do not want to miss. On your seats, you will find flyers with the information for April 20th event. Please take a look at that, as well as other events, as well as the Union website for more information. Now, without further ado, for tonight's focus. Tonight's conversation is focused on the role of women in democratic governments and governance. Across the globe, women experience marginalization from political spheres and processes that influence our common life together. The disproportionate exclusion of women from these processes are often as a result of discriminatory practices around laws, access to education, healthcare, and opportunities to gain economic stability and independence. It is important to note that the obstacles preventing women from participating in political life are not merely an issue or a new issue to the 21st century, nor emergent democracies, but have been a part of history and long-established democracies. Female voices can either be privileged or pushed to the peripheries of the political process. And again, while we cannot ignore the fact that these issues are not new, we do have to pay attention to the unique convergence of events at this time. We are on the other side of January 2017 and the inauguration of Donald Trump as president. It cannot be ignored that Donald Trump's cabinet has fewer women and non-whites than any original cabinets of the last 4 presidents. And tonight, we will have a conversation about the role of women in democracy as relates to both the history and the fact that we sit on the cusp of events at present day that will impact democratic engagement, not only in the US, but across the globe, namely the election of Donald Trump as president. Tonight's panel is the brainchild of Ms. Leymah Gbowee, who I will introduce in a moment. Leymah has recruited an incredible group of women to come talk with us. And we, as listeners in this room, have the privilege of eavesdropping in on a conversation filled with brilliance, ingenuity, and courage. And it is my pleasure to sit with these women this evening. We had a little conversation before, and we just decided we're going to have fun as we engage serious topics. So without further ado, I would like to introduce and bring to the stage Tanya Henderson. Please give her a warm welcome. Tanya is an international human rights lawyer whose work has focused on women's empowerment, the role of women in conflict resolution, and coalition building among global leaders, women political leaders. Tanya is the founder and executive director of Mina's List, a nonprofit dedicated to realizing women's political representation in national governments around the world. The organization provides the necessary tools and resources to empower women who aim to run for political office and commit to advance women's rights in the political sphere. Again, welcome, Tanya. And next, I would like to invite Dr. Michaela Luttrell Rowland to the stage. Please give her a warm welcome. Michaela is a comparative social policy expert whose research focuses on feminist political economy. She currently serves as the Associate Director of Women, Peace, and Security Initiative at Columbia University's Earth Institute. In this role, Michaela works to bolster peace-building opportunities for women activists through the sharing of resources, knowledge, and experience. Under her guidance, Columbia's graduate students are offered real-life peace-building experience with women practitioners from conflict and post-conflict areas around the world. We are grateful for your work today. And next, I would like to invite to the stage Jamia Wilson. Let's give her a warm welcome. Jamia has been movement building, media making, and storytelling for over a decade. A leading voice of feminism and gender justice, Jamia is the executive director of Women Action and the Media, or WHAM. WHAM is a nonprofit organization building a robust, effective, inclusive movement for gender justice in the media. Jamia has previously served as the Executive Director of Youth Tech Health, TED Prize Storyteller, the Vice President of Programs at the Women's Media Center, and the Principal for Planned Parenthood Federation of America's Youth Outreach Program. Welcome. And now I'd like to ask Ms. Tamika Mallory to come to the stage. Please give her a warm welcome. Tamika is the founder of Mallory Consulting, a strategic planning firm with a specific focus on African American outreach, is an outspoken and nationally recognized social justice advocate. She served as one of the 4 national co-chairs of the Women's March on Washington, a worldwide protest held in late January 2017, immediately following the U.S. presidential inauguration of Donald J. Trump. The march was the largest single-day demonstration in U.S. history. Woo! Previously, Tamika was a leading figure in the grassroots community-based effort to stop gun violence in New York City. She served on the Transition Committee of New York City Mayor-elect Bill de Blasio and was the National Action Network's youngest executive director. Welcome. Thank you for your work. And finally, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Leymah Gbowee, who's saying no, to the stage. Let's give her a warm welcome. In 2011, Nobel Peace Laureate Leymah Gbowee is a Liberian peace activist, social worker, and women's rights advocate. She is founder and president of the Gbowee Peace Foundation Africa, based in Monrovia. Leymah is best known for leading a nonviolent movement that brought together Christian and Muslim women to play a pivotal role in ending Liberia's devastating 14-year civil war in 2003. This historic achievement paved the way for the election of Africa's first female head of state, Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. It also marked the vanguard of a new wave of women emerging worldwide as essential and uniquely effective participants in brokering lasting peace and security. Help me welcome once again 2011 Nobel Peace Laureate Leymah Gbowee. So as promised, we are simply eavesdropping in on a conversation this evening, and the first question I have for our panelists and to consider is, why women? Why women and girls is the question that everyone's going to ask in this work at some point, and we have to galvanize support around. So why women and girls, and in what ways have women and girls been significant in the work you do?
I guess I'll go first then. I'm the one with the big mouth anyway, so the protester in the room. And I guess the answer for me would be, why not women? You know, like, why not? I think women and girls have been really at the forefront of every movement, whether or not it's always acknowledged is one thing, but the idea that any movement has happened in this world without very strong, powerful women being behind it, is something that, we all know that has in fact been what is going on in this country. I mean, even when you look at yesterday being the day that Dr. King was assassinated 49 years ago, we celebrate Dr. King, but the truth is that there was the Coretta Scott Kings and others who were there pushing and really sort of being the wind beneath his wings. And so, women, particularly in this moment, we are in a space where if we are allowed to really lead and be successful in the ways that we need to, this entire nation will rise.
Well, for me, it's a simple thing. Ask everyone in this room, cover one of your eyes and try to see the whole picture. Try it. Cover, everyone, cover and try to see. You can't even get the full picture on here. And leaving out women in any space is like trying to see everything in this world with one eye cover. So we should not continue to make case and more cases, because it's almost like the world is handicapped, in different spheres and in different areas, because when you try to do life without almost 51% of the population, you miss something very significant, something that should help to fast track. On one of my trips to Germany, I asked the men, don't you all get exhausted pretending like you know it all? It's because that is the way the world is working. Leaving out women, trying to do government, trying to do healthcare, it's sad, but I don't spend my time answering that question. The way I answer it is cover one eye and try to see the whole picture.
I was in Athens this summer, and they introduced it as the birthplace of democracy, and then later on talk about the fact that, that women, while votes were going on, while debates were going on, that was the hill that the women sat at. And I thought, how could you say this is the birthplace of democracy when half your population, weren't even allowed to be there, right? And so often we talk about democracy without that concept of representation. It's just not. That's not democracy.
Yeah, so one thing that I think that's a really interesting point in terms of this question of what is democracy, right? And I think that for at least our work with women, peace, and security, to understand or think about peace and security and not talk about women and not talk about the roles that women are playing, you just really can't, as Leymah says, get the full picture. And the other question about that is which women, right? So one of the main features of the program at Columbia is not only talking about sort of formal peacemaking and formal peacekeeping, but also really turning to women as experts, women who are peace builders, activists, right? And so not only women, but actually which women? Right. And so how does that actually change the conversation? What do we learn in ways that we really need to be thinking about these questions? So one question is women, and then also making sure that the women that we are listening to and taking seriously really captures how we understand these questions.
When I think about the question of why women or why it's important to single out women, which is a question I hear from online trolls often. I think about the fact that there's not one single man on that cabinet that the current president has. That's 75% of that cabinet is white men. Not one single one of them could have come into this world and gotten where they are without a woman, literally. So to me, it's extremely bothersome to think about our position globally. But I also think that it's by design because of our force. And I have my little brooch on that says smash the patriarchy. It's a little hammer. And for me, it is a reminder of the power that I contain that has been systematically oppressed and suppressed because of that understanding by the people who built those institutions, that if women were afforded all of the opportunities that we deserve as human beings, if we were afforded the full dignity that every other human was afforded, that we would be able to transform our world into one where everyone is included and where all of us can live safely and freely. So my work is focused on media, and a big part of that is because even if we change our policies and laws, if we don't change our culture and we don't shift the way that we talk about what womanhood means, if we don't change the way that we feminize jobs and labor that are undesirable for men, the way that we monetize the value for that labor because women and people of color are doing it, then it won't matter what laws we have on the table because we'll still have a cultural consciousness that leads us in a place where we should be seen and treated with dignity. So that is why women, because without women there would be no us. And we should respect that in every action that we take.
Why aren't we asking the question, why men? Right?
Yeah. It's like, let's talk about it. And thinking about why don't we ask the question of why not men, right? The narrative and the power of narrative. We know that in any occupation, that often by seeing models and mentors, people often go into those occupations. And I wonder who controls the narrative around women and political office, elected officials, and democracy. Where do you see the narrative being controlled? You mentioned media, Jamia, but where else do you see the narrative being controlled? How do you see the power narrative around women, political office, government, and policy, and influencing how women take up these positions and how women's issues are considered within these sectors?
I'll say briefly that as it relates to women running for office, they say that it actually will take a man to ask a woman after she's been asked 7 times by her friends and other people to run. And there is, I think you hit it right on the head. There is this sense of patriarchy that exists that unless the man says it's okay, a woman doesn't necessarily feel empowered. But I do believe that we are beginning to shift that narrative. When you look at after the Women's March, you have over 1,000 women who have indicated that they want to run for office. And I think that sort of empowerment, what was important about the march wasn't so much just being the day after Donald Trump's inauguration, but it was more so empowering women. And this idea that being pro-woman means that you are against the man is not accurate. I think we all have the right to live in a space of, feeling empowered and beautiful about who we are, and to love ourselves. And I think that is what we're beginning to see as a shift. You talked earlier about young girls. And I believe that what young girls are seeing now, after looking at, Michelle Obama for 8 years in the White House, an unapologetic, beautiful, strong woman, and even though Hillary Clinton may not have been victorious, in terms of winning the election, she certainly showed throughout the process that she was, in fact, the most qualified person running, 1, and 2, just to be president at that time. And I think young girls are beginning to see themselves in a different position, and that is what we want to continue to push forward.
I think also when you look at the whole concept of who controls the narrative, I'm not one of those women who would say, let's blame the women, but the narrative is also controlled by us. It's controlled by the way we see ourselves, but also the way we see other women in politics. I spend my time traveling around the world trying to influence and going to places where I have no business being. I mean, last time I was in Sri Lanka, and we were trying to push for more women to get elected. And every time the backlash we got was 60-something years ago, we had a woman prime minister, and she did nothing for us. All right, I hear you. But after 60-something years, you've had all men, and all they did was to take you to war. What's your excuse for electing them? You know, so over time, it's not, once we frame it, we believe it, and communities run with it. So I like what you're saying. It's changing. But we also need to take a step back and really start appreciating one another for the mistakes that we make as leaders, but also those in leadership need to take a step back and say, I will take all of the criticism from other women, because feminism is not about being hypocritical. You know, every time people read my bio and say the work that we did in Liberia led to the elections of Africa's first female president, and then in my mind I say, have you ever asked me what is the relationship? There's no relationship, because I am one of those who got tired of seeing the emperor with no clothes on and had the mouth to say, you know what? People are lying to you. Your policies are wrong. It's nepotistic and all of that. From that moment onward, the narrative is she's not a real feminist because she dared to criticize a leader. And so people now start to examine what is the role. And unfortunately, what has happened is that in our tiny country of 4 million people, we're split in half. Those who support the narrative of feminists standing up for regardless of what, and those who support the narrative that we should be hypocritical once it comes to the agenda of women. So when you talk about, it's not the media, because we take it to the media. Without us, there will be no narrative of they failed and they haven't failed and who wants to be in politics. And also, when you look at the political space, especially in Africa, who elect the men? The women. The way we describe them is that they form the political parties. There is a women's wing and the youth wing, and then the men fly to power, and then they drop the wings and they control everything. So it's the women who usually come together and say, we're going to do this. So until we really begin to, and this is a tough call, at the community, I have faith in the younger generation, her and all of the other people. I think my generation and the ones before, their role was to create the road for us to walk on, but politics was not their thing. I'm sorry to the old girls in the room. You know, seriously, politics was not their thing. It was not there for them. But the younger girls, my 7-year-old and my 25-year-old and 22-year-old children are looking at it and saying, if they can do it, I too can do it. But we also need to begin to change the narrative, because if we don't change it at the community level, it's not going to change in the media.
So I want to take the privilege then to have an internal conversation amongst women about how do we get everyone to the table. It sounds like this conversation needs to be a bit intergenerational, as you point out, Leymah, and also to correct the narrative for our circle. How do we get people to the table? What's needed to get women to the table, intergenerationally, across boundaries, across borders, across class status, to have this conversation?
Again, the big mouth that talks too much. What I will say is that throughout the Women's March process, what people need to know is, like, January 21st, the beauty of it took a lot of pain to get to that space. And to your point, the backlash that we received and the sort of the hate that we were receiving from men, we expected. But it was the relationship with other women to try to get women to support us and to understand what we were doing. And it was very difficult. There was a lot of challenges, and that didn't just come up for me in the Women's March space. It's also come up for me in the Black Lives Matter space, in the civil rights space in general. So what you are saying is 100% right, that we do have an internal issue in terms of us being able to support one another. What we learned, however, and how we got to this place where all these women came together finally, was that we began to remove, sort of take ourselves out of our expert issue, right? Because I'm married to criminal justice reform. I live it, I wake up, I know it. You ask me a stat, I'm ready. But I had to be able to put criminal justice reform over here and be concerned about climate justice, reproductive rights, just other issues in general that matter to other people. And when they were able to do that as well, when I was able to get white women to understand that reproductive rights doesn't just mean your physical body, but it also means that a woman of color may not want to have children because she's afraid that her child may be killed in a community that is not safe, right? And when we were able to get people to start thinking that way on behalf of another, sort of looking at humanity from a place that it is not just about me, but it is about my sister, her issue, everyone started to come to the table. But it took a lot of work, and we learned that as we were going along. We didn't know it when we started because it would have been much easier. We found that out, maybe a month into planning after many nights of tears and, of some tough conversations that we had to have.
Yeah, I think that, what I also heard you say is just actually taking the time to have those conversations, because so many times when we are activists or political actors, we do have our agenda, but to be able to have the space. And for a few years I was doing coalition work with women parliamentarians from countries that the U.S. was engaged in conflict with. So we had women legislators from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco, and U.S. And we would meet about 3 times a year, and they would come together. And while it sounds lovely, the reality is it's not. The Afghan and Pakistan women, really had some serious conflicts with each other. And one of the examples just about taking the time is, so we had this whole agenda because we were there on a Women, Peace, and Security coalition building activity. And while we were there, one of the top Taliban leaders got killed by a U.S. drone in Pakistan. So the U.S. women political leaders were like, oh my gosh, that's so bad. These are our drones. And the Pakistani Afghan women are like cheering and like hugging each other. And they had no idea where each other was coming from. And so, and it started to get heated, So actually we had to, I said, what we have to do for the next 2 hours, we have to put aside, and we're just going to sit down and try and understand where you're coming from, so the U.S. women legislators can go back with informed information about their policy making, and I think that time, we don't take it most of the time, but it needs to happen in order for that understanding to occur. Yeah.
Unfortunately, no donor
Right.
on the flip side
Right?
will pay for women in third world and developing countries to sit down and tease out these issues. This is not a new theory.
Right.
This is something that through the practice of the work that we've done, for women to engage in peace processes, they need to exhale, meaning take away all of the things that hurt them. The way I describe most women in conflict contexts is that we're like sponges. We're taking all of the dirt, all of the pain and the trauma and the pain and the trauma. For you to actively engage in peace work, you need to suck it out. And that kind of sucking out can only happen if that space is created for them to sit and talk. I remember the first time I had the opportunity before getting involved in activism to talk. Everyone in the room said it took me almost 5 hours telling my story. Wow. I woke up that morning feeling light, rejuvenated, and ready to move on. So in every process, there is that moment where people have to stop and think. But unfortunately, and when you're talking about how do we bring people to the table, those are the ways, because you would never imagine the number of expertise or experts in different areas that walk around our communities. But unless you bring them, to just talk about stuff. I know one of the strongest activists we have today in Liberia is a grassroots activist that I met maybe 20 years ago in pristine white, the wife of a pastor. And when I asked her, how do you deal with domestic violence? Her answer then was, pray about it. Today, she leads a movement where in her community, if there is an allegation of rape, they come to her first. She have women that she will send to arrest the alleged perpetrator, and you dare not resist. They come to her hut, sit with her, and if she sees anything like truth in the matter, she turns you over to the police. How is it possible that 20 years ago, this is someone who had no idea of her rights? 20 years later, but because that space to exhale, to grow, and put out was created. So it's not how do we get to the table, but how do we prepare communities and the spaces, create the spaces for people to get. I'm a firm believer in women-only spaces.
Yeah. Just responding also to that, Leymah, I think one of the things that's really important in terms of this question of, imagining a table, is also thinking that, particularly in terms of, government, we often stop at the question of representation, right? And so I'm thinking of Argentina, for example, where Argentina was the first country in Latin America to have gender quotas, to have women in, offices. And that didn't necessarily translate into less violence for everyday lives of women, right? And so I think one really important conversation is about representation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that in terms of really having serious conversations about everyday lives and everyday violence, that it's actually going to translate in that way. So we have to be really sort of attentive and careful.
Yeah, I agree. The way and the how is extremely important, because one of the things we have to think about is if we're doing transactional movement building, it's not the same thing as transformational movement building. And so one of the questions people like myself who are doing media get a lot is, oh, well, I don't hear you championing Kellyanne Conway's ascent to power. But when she is supporting and advancing policies that harm women and many other people, that is not feminist, that is not justice, and that is not equality. That is a visually representational win, but it is not transformation. It's actually reiterating a status quo, and it rewards benevolent patriarchy so that benevolent patriarchs can say, oh yes, I did a thing by putting a woman in this position to advance my agenda. Not to discount the labor of a woman, of her as a woman, but to say that we've seen that time and time again. We've seen that with Tomi Lahren, who I greatly disagree with on every single issue almost, now being kicked off the Blaze for having a viewpoint that was different than the men who hired her. And I think that that was one example. I think we're going to see a lot more of this as this administration goes on, of why we have to move beyond representation. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that a commitment that I made on 11/9, as I like to call it, was that I was going to really focus on radical solidarity in a new way, that my contacts are going to become more transparent. How much money I make and how much I made at other organizations so other women can negotiate better, I'm going to be more transparent about that. I will open doors to help other people get there because some people lifted me up so I could climb, and I'm going to do even more to commit to doing that for them, and especially young women and girls of color who have to deal with that double jeopardy of having more additional barriers for them. So the radical solidarity is also needed with the transformation for us to even move beyond a table that doesn't have a space for all of us.
And you said it, you took words right out of my brain. And I would kind of flip it a little bit, that I think that's another issue, is that we somehow feel like there is not enough space around the table, or that there is not enough space in the room. And I tell people all the time that there's more than enough space, there's more than enough work. Like, we all need to be in these spaces doing what we do best. What happens is that folks start feeling a way about, like, I want to do what you do. And perhaps I need to stay in the lane that I'm in. And I really honestly believe that all the different lanes make up the highway towards progress. If people get in them and really perfect what you're doing and work together and support one another, we can really do some positive things. And so I am constantly trying to break down this idea that the room is too small and therefore there needs to be all this competition of who gets in and who gets to the table.
I just want to jump back to the concept about representation, and then also bring in mentorship here, because I think the mentorship role is really, essential in the solidarity. And so actually, Mina's List mission is we work towards women's equal and substantive representation. So actually, we support women from the grassroots, women that are already advancing a women's rights and peace agenda at the grassroots, and then helping to politically empower them. But the reality is that's a great idea, and it's lovely in theory, but how are they really going to get there, right? So, so that's where the solidarity of having the mentors that are going to help to create, lead them along the pathway, but then also once they get there, help protect them, right? Help, be that second voice, because all the time we hear about the tipping point, but to be, one woman on a committee, in a patriarchal, society, it's so hard to even have your voice heard, right? So we need the mentors, and then we need, the solidarity of our grassroots to support them. So.
I want to pick up on this thread around transactional versus transformational progress and work. And I'm also mindful that I do not, and I know that we do not want to reinscribe that narrative out there that women cannot get along or do not get along. And I know the work is also tiresome for you all. So share with us a little bit the bright spots where you look across the globe and you say, this is women coming to the table, doing it right, getting engaged in the political process, and messing some stuff up for the world.
Well, I don't think necessarily in the political space, but just those badass women that I meet every day in my journey, just back from Mozambique, the young activists who are standing up to the increased sexual violence in that country. And I remember one Grasa Sambo who sat on the table and said, I think one day I'm going to die doing what I do. And then she had this big smile on her face. And she said, the beauty of it is that I know that all of you around this table will be at my funeral. But if that is not inspiration, for me, that is, and someone will say, no, that's depressing. No. These are people who know what they're standing for, and they're prepared to die for it. And what I said to her is that you've gotten too big in this country for anyone to kill you like that. So keep making noise, because there's something about the way we carry on as activists that our mouths, the big mouth, becomes your protection. The other bright spot for me is, and I like to give these little examples, going to Congo and sitting in a room with 100 women, all of them have been violated, sexually violated. And I led a delegation of super rich people from here. Nobel laureates were I was the one leading the delegation as an African. And in that room, the New York Times reporters and the LA Times person, all they wanted to ask these women was, how many times you've been raped? What did you feel? And I'm sitting at that table with I'm purposely not saying anything because I will have my say. But I was picking on something that sadly no one from the West was picking on. As each woman told her story, I was raped, I wanted to die, I tried to kill myself, and the women came. They gave me hope, they took me to the doctor, and now I can live. I was raped, I wanted to die. So by the time I didn't know that I was writing and doing circles and circles and circles, and my notebook was getting fed. I have these notebooks, there are a lot of them, that when I'm old, I will sell on eBay for a lot of money.
They will sell.
So I write, all my children will steal it and sell it on eBay, whatever. But I'm writing. Stop. What I'm seeing is not a society of violated women. The narrative in the US and other parts of the world is that Congo is the rape capital of the world. What I am hearing is that we are the capital city of sisterhood. How do you get violated and use your energy after your own violation, not thinking about self? So for me, those are the bright spots. These are the ones, those women in Panzi hospitals who had gone through 10, 15 corrective surgery because of the rape that they experienced, and was standing in front of cameras and saying to the American women, go and tell Obama the Great Lake region will not have peace unless he bring all of our president into one room and pull their ears. And you're standing there and saying, so the way we look at politics is not just from there. It is the everyday thing that matters in the lives of everyday people. So when governments, and in countries where conflicts have happened, when government fail to, like we saw in Mozambique, civil society steps in and become the defunct government. Women become the defunct politicians. They are helping to shape the agenda in the communities. Those, for me, are the bright spots. Those are the things that keep me, like, for example, being on the road for 6 weeks nonstop. Yeah. Okay, I'll shut up.
No. Please don't shut up. Don't shut up. just today, and Akib, who works with me, can attest to what happened to me. I was on a radio show today, and I was asked a question about the man who came here and killed Timothy McLaughlin, and I made a statement and, said why I think it's happening and how there is an uptick in racial violence, and mentioned Donald Trump. And there was a white man who was on the panel with me, and he got upset and started calling me stupid on the panel. And then after calling me stupid for a while, he got really upset because he couldn't match me intellectually. He couldn't really fight. And then there was another black man on the panel who was super smart and ready for him, had all his facts and whatnot together. And the man stood up and said, I don't have to listen to this loudmouth little girl, and walked out. And so talk about bright spots. The video was online all day, and a lot of people were texting me, mostly women, texting me saying, are you okay? What happened or whatever? And I'm going on. And then the video disappeared because the network decided to pull the video. They felt that it did not represent them well enough, wasn't good for them. And so all these women, the same women, just started saying, oh, heck no. Like, we're not going to have that. Like, you were abused today, and we have to do something about it. So I started out kind of like, well, hey. And then the empowerment of other sister voices saying to me, you cannot allow what happened to you, because it may bounce off of you, but there is someone else who he will talk to this way, and they will actually believe what he's saying about them. And he said, you can't allow that to happen. And I said, oh, let me go sit down and write my little statement and get my things together, because I have people behind me who are willing to stand up and support me. And so the space where a woman is there to lift you, from my mother, who has sacrificed so much to ensure that I am in this space today, to the women that I walk with every day, Carmen Perez and Linda Salso and all the others. It is so empowering. It gives me the energy to keep going when it feels like the world is beating you down,
So after we talk about this, I want to know how I can help check him later on and get some wham into his life. We got a wham is going to happen. So we will talk about that because he needs to be checked. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is that I think it's so important for us to highlight those bright spots that happen, because those bright spots, one, help give us strength and nourish us when people do try to beat us down, when they try to lie to us to make us believe that we are less than. We need to hear those wins. So one thing that I like to talk about is how we had record-breaking women of color winning. We needed more, but in terms of the House this year in the United States, that we have our first Somali American congresswoman who is in Minnesota serving. And we had a white woman representative in Minnesota today whose video's gone viral saying to the men on the floor there that they always ignore women of color. And it caused so much tension in the room that some of the Republican white male congressmen there said that they felt like it was a hostile work environment. That it was, they actually said that, in quote, that it had been named that these women of color have been ignored. And this woman went on as an ally and kept listing the times in which she'd heard these women of color, who were also her sisters in the House in Minnesota, make speeches where they had been ignored on important issues to their constituents. And I thought, you know, this is a win. And not just a win for righteousness, but this is a win for women's solidarity that I think is also what might not have happened the way that it did if 11/9 had gone a different way. And so that's something that I like to uphold. And even thinking about Standing Rock and how many women were in leadership there and what a powerful, powerful action that was. But we don't talk about how women were at the helm. We don't talk about how Black Lives Matter emerged from women who led Black Lives Matter and founded Black Lives Matter. And so I think it's really important for us to tell those stories and drive the narrative with our stories, because otherwise those stories get lost. One example of that I'll share is that I had heard a panel of men talking about Dr. King's history of social justice work and how it informed the way that activism happens now. And they all mentioned all these other different social justice movements around the environment, around economic justice, other important work. But they didn't mention the fact that he had been a reproductive rights activist and had been the first Margaret Sanger Award winner for Planned Parenthood. That wasn't mentioned. And I got critiqued for naming that in an article to the conference organizers, that I named that one panel was an all-male panel, and I felt like it led to a deficient synopsis of history. And if we continue to let that happen, then we lose the wins, and then that becomes the truth. So I think in a false truth era and post-truth, as they call it, alternative facts era, it's even more important for us to illuminate the wins, because otherwise the lies become the truth, and we can't let that happen.
Yeah, just briefly, as Leymah said, we've just gotten back from this trip to Mozambique to meet with women about the peace process, and it was incredibly inspiring to speak to the activists and incredibly energy giving. But it also was really important to speak to community women themselves and to hear that peace begins at home. That was the sort of main thing we kept hearing over and over and over again. And the reason why that stuck with me, and the reason why that sort of really gave me energy and hope, is because we have to remember that these systems are linked, right? Oppression is linked and these systems are linked. And unless we start mobilizing and listening to multiple voices, we won't understand how to really be thinking about peace and security in ways that really work. So I feel like we got so much knowledge and stories from the activists, and we also got knowledge and stories from the women themselves. So that was really something that felt meaningful and important.
I'm mindful of time, and I know we want to take some questions from those of you gathered here. So we'll open the mic. There's a mic here on the right side of the room, if those of you want to line up to ask a question. And we're just going to ask that we be sure to ask a question. We have 5 brilliant minds here, so everyone can get to the table, and then we can get another question in.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful and inspiring panel. So I just spent the past year in Trump country, effectively, and it was, for me, an incredibly powerful and eye-opening experience. And I'm in medical school, and I was working with patients who were really, it was an overwhelmingly white community, and I think really saw themselves on the margin of society and were positioned in a place that Trump's arguments, really affected them. And I've been thinking about this a lot in the context of the narrative that has emerged of white women voted for Trump. And because representation, as you're talking about, didn't win, white women were in the minority who voted for a woman. And I'm wondering how we start to make the case for sisterhood for these women who might feel at the margins of, conversations around intersectional feminism, and for whom Trump's economic arguments and racist arguments even may have been more compelling than that of representation, and how we sort of start to bring them into the movement. I think the Women's March was an incredible representation of people from all over, but how we continue to build sisterhood and bring them into kind of the fold in the movement.
I was in Trump country too. A few months before elections, interesting. Like in the back of Indiana, it was so bad there that I wanted to do breakfast out of my hotel. My host had to call the hotel manager to tell him that I'm bringing a guest, and tell your patrons no one should call her a nigger, because this is a different kind of nigger. Because I would have whooped someone's ass. That's no moment. So we got in there, and they had given us a private room to have breakfast. That's how bad. This little girl, who was my hostess, is black, and she moved there in January, and she said, "You would never believe, Sis Leymah, how many times I'm in Walmart and they whisper, 'Get out of here, nigger,' or someone just coming." And she said, in her mind, she said, "I ain't going nowhere. I came here to make my money. I'm staying right here. I'm going nowhere." But she said, so it watches over her. She's Liberian. But at that place, I recognized that a lot of what we do is missing. And knowledge is power, And I was asking my friend and sister, would the activists, and I probably don't have an answer for you, but I'm adding on to your question for the women here. Would the activists in America be willing to sit down with Melania Trump and Ivanka Trump and Kellyanne Conway to talk about the issues that matters to feminists? Because they might not know some of these things. And this sister of mine, who's very open-minded, look at me like, "Girl, you're dumb." But I still think that there should be. Some of it may be a hopeless case. And the reason why I say this is because I'm still part of the South Sudanese peace process. And the word out is that one of the warlord's wife is key to peace. So I insisted that the UN bring these women around the table. And my kids last year some of them were with me at the meeting. So the rebel leader's wife, a former president's wife, they were all sitting around the table, and I'm there. And we brought grassroots women. My point was, let them hear the sufferings of these women. Maybe it will help shift their mind. The others got it, but one woman did not get it. I could wash my hands afterwards and say, I did everything that I could. But 4 years from now, can the activists in this country, if they have this us versus them narrative, because that's exactly what it is. Let's call it for what it is. Whether they're feminists or not, let's call it for what it is. But I think if there was a moment where I would suggest that there is a space where we sit down, or you all sit and say, this is why we march. Mm-hmm. What do you have to offer us? Mm-hmm. How can we build this bridge? Mm-hmm. Because I think until you do that, the country will continue to divide. Even here in New York, we had to do an emergency conversation with students at a high school here, because since 11/9, one race sit on one side of the classroom, another race sit on the other side. And we cannot overstate that this country is deeply divided. And it would take a lot of guts and tenacity from activists to call in, and I think that's where who's the bigger person comes in to say, let's have a conversation. Let's begin to have a conversation about Planned Parenthood, about women's bodily integrity, about sexual rights, reproductive rights, and all of the things that matter. You're right, because the young people are picking on. And I don't think, even if he doesn't win elections 4 years from now, the country will still be deeply divided. Mm-hmm. And trust me, as divided as this country is, I have made a commitment to myself that I'm going to decrease my travels, because in all of my life of traveling, I have never experienced increased racism as I've seen in the last 6 weeks.
The death threats and hate that we received after the Women's March was real, like real, to the point where certain people had to get security. There's a lot of things that have had to happen, a lot more people watching us because there's been a lot of hate, but that doesn't speak to your point. Let me say, I come from several different perspectives on this, and I don't think there's any one way to answer it. I agree that there has to be moments where we sit down and work together. You know, I am involved in New York State, specifically in the Raise the Age campaign, where right now 16 and 17-year-olds in this state are being tried as adults for nonviolent offenses. And right now we have the opportunity to raise the age of criminal responsibility in two different ways. There's one way that the governor and the Republicans and others are pushing, you know, on one side, and then the Democrats have another opinion of what raise the age should look like. And, you know, just very briefly, one point is that on one side, which is the governor's side, there is this idea that if you're 16 years old and you commit a crime such as Khalif Browder, you allegedly stole a book bag, your record would be open for 10 years, you know, after you have served your time. And so for us, for some of us, that issue is a non-starter, because then you didn't raise the age. Because if I still have a record for 10 years, then then I'm still a criminal. That's the bottom line. And so we usually go to Albany to protest, to sit in, to fall out, and, you know, make sure everybody knows you won't move, you know, government shut down everything, and we got our good mantras and things we say and our protest songs. But last night we jumped in the car in the rain in the middle of the night and drove to Albany to go talk to legislators and look them in their eyes, and we didn't go there to yell and scream and protest. We went there to try to understand and have conversation to try to work out some of the details of the bill. Not everyone is able to do that. And in fact, I believe that in movements, you need all different types of people doing different things. You need some people who are unwilling to sit at the table, because those are the people who at times we need to be able to fall behind those strong people who say, this is what we mean, and we will not break or bend. It must be this way. Then you need negotiators. Then you need people who understand policy. So you need different types of people doing different things. In the Women's March space, what was important for us is that we had a platform. We are pro-choice, period. If the pro-life community want to come to the march, you're welcome like everyone else. We weren't checking people and say, you know, give me your pedigree in order to be able to get your bus ticket to come to the march. So I think, to your point, Leymah, to sit down at the table doesn't mean that I have to sit at the table and bend on my values. I need to be able to show up at the table saying, this is what I stand for. And if you are willing to have a conversation with me, we can discuss it, but I'm still going to walk away from here, especially when my cause is righteous. Especially when my cause is righteous. I can walk away from here and we can actually agree that we don't agree at all. But you understand where I'm coming from, and I've heard you, and hopefully you can move to a space where you're more compassionate. However, I do not believe I do not believe that in this particular, because we're dealing with some very, very intelligent people. People like to say Donald Trump is dumb and this one is dumb and this one. They're not dumb at all. These people are very intelligent. They're very calculative. They know exactly what they're doing. Kellyanne Conway is probably, I need her to work for me. I mean, the way in which she can flip to alternative facts, right in your face, and you sitting there like, well, what is alternative? It's a lie. That's what alternative facts means, But the way in which she can do that, very intelligent people. So they know exactly what they're doing. Omarosa is someone who works for the president, who I know, who is a friend, and she knows exactly what's happening in communities of color. And to have a president who says he's going to send the troops into Chicago to deal with gun violence rather than to send in jobs and educational opportunities for our young people. So yeah, there's a way for us to sit down. But you have to go back and say to those people who are in Trump land, when you come to the table, what are you willing to give up? And what are you offering to the people who are at the table who are from marginalized communities and have been living under oppression all of our lives?
I kind of want to respond to that a little bit because I think, I guess what I just want to do is bring it down to when we are in the room, and not necessarily from a policy perspective. I think that I have no idea how to bring Trump supporters in. But if you're talking about, the women, right? Some of those marginalized, women that thought that. Is my microphone on?
No, sorry. I think he can stay. Those two, you can, yeah. I'm always destroying panels, sorry. But I'm a pineapple. Mothers have eyes all over their body, and my eyes saw that. I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, I think we just need to sometimes bring these conversations down to a human level. So let's just say we're in that room. And I'm saying that from the perspective of, I can share one example where I was with a group of Afghan women, and the Afghan women's movement became really, really divided over their International Violence Against Women's Act or piece of legislation. And some thought it should go to Parliament for a vote, and others thought that it should stay at an executive order level because if it went to vote, it would fail. And it became very hostile and very, very divided, this women's movement did. And so, a year later, I had some of those same women together in the room, and some of them were saying to me, I don't even know why she's here. She doesn't advance women's rights. She just, almost trashed our International Violence Against Women's Act. And so you could see it was really, really intense and conflicted. But at the end of the day, I had them each tell their story of why they ran for political office. And this one woman that everybody said, I don't even know why she's here, goes on to tell her story about that she always knew she would run for political office. Her father was in politics. In fact, he was killed, because of his political views. So then when he died, she had to be married off because her mother couldn't support the family, and she was 8. And the night of her wedding, she was trying to decide whether she would bring her doll or leave it for her younger sister. And then goes on to talk about, by the time she's 20, she's got, 6 kids, and she's a refugee in Iran, and tells this extraordinary story about essentially starting a school for refugee children, but said when the U.S. came in and took down the Taliban, I knew I had to move back because I needed to run for office to eradicate child marriage. And then when the other women heard that story, all of a sudden, they saw her in a different light, right? And what she said to them is, there's many ways to get to the same goal. And now they're united in a way they weren't before that. So I do think that we sometimes have to get to that human level to begin to break down those barriers.
Thank you. We are going to take the last 2 questions. I'm just going to ask if maybe 2 panelists can take each question, and we can, okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is John Braden. I'm an educator, a writer, and I host a TV show, a weekly TV show on education, the arts, and social change. I'm a white man, but I'm not the enemy. I love this panel. This is a beautiful panel. I am so happy to be here, to be in this dialogue. I want this dialogue to go on. I think it's so crucial. I think the world is in danger now more than ever with this patriarchy out of control, with Trump as president. And I've seen this my whole life as a feminized male or, that there is a kind of feminine consciousness that we need. That's, who is it? Nell Noddings, okay, talks about this ethos of caring. There's a book called Women's Ways of Knowing. This honoring of dialogue, of community, of mending, of weaving, of creating, saving the world. We need to save the world, and I think this is not represented in our media, all right, since Phil Donahue was kind of a feminine type host, TV show host. We don't have that. We had Alan Alda back in the 70s, if you remember. How do we get back on track with a culture that values men who are sensitive, caring, that shows up models of this, and connect it to a politics, a real politique activity that's going to save the world, it's going to change the world and save the world. The world is in danger.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the question is there a... Okay, can we go ahead and ask the last question as well? And we're going to do both of them at the same time. And if we could go ahead and attend to the question so we'll be mindful of the panelists' time and answers.
So I consider myself a feminist. Okay, I think it's in my own best interest that women have equal rights to men. Okay, so my question is, since at least half of the population of the world is men, how are you going to try and convince the men that it's in their best interest to be feminist? Okay, and the same thing is, and also there are women who are not feminist.
Okay.
So how are you going to convince them?
Okay, thank you, sir. I think I can combine both of these questions into one, all right? What is the significance or not the significance of engaging men in this conversation and making them the center of this conversation around women and democracy? And we have time for a couple, at least three of you, more than two.
You give me life. I mean, I'm like Maxine Waters was giving me life earlier this week, and you give me life right now. Oh, you're giving me life. So what I think is so important to remember is that we are conditioned. When we are born as humans who are conditioned to conform to a certain gender, we are conditioned to believe that we are essentializing a set of traits and characteristics. And so then we get to that point where we think that if you go against that, or where society will punish you if you go against what's imposed, then there are consequences to that. So I think there's a broader cultural conversation we need to have about how we talk about gender, how we create institutions, how we talk about labor that's attached to certain kinds of bodies. That will go a long way. Toxic masculinity hurts all of us. Toxic masculinity is why we have wars. Toxic masculinity is why we have rape. Toxic masculinity is why we have domination. And we know, for example, when we hear about prison rape, for example, that happens in all male environments, there's still this dominator, subjugator positioning, and that the way that we handle and talk about power in our culture is really at the root of that. I think the other thing we really need to talk about is about how we center these conversations, like you said, that we need to talk about this as a quality, not about one gender needing to be convinced about the humanity of the other in order to be able to support each other. That if we suffer, men suffer too. And I think that when I think about the questions about, whether or not we should pander to people who voted for the subjugation of people like me, I think about that question a lot, because I think actually, no, the sad part to me is that on their way to being harmed by the policies that they have invoked, that are not in their best interests, I will be harmed too. So they will eventually learn, like maybe 7 generations from now, but that is also going to happen. And I think that also has to do with the way that we look at gender. We look at family medical leave policies, for example. In this generation, we're seeing a transformation in terms of how we're regarding income within families and parents, I'm a part of the debt generation. Both my husband and I have student debt. And so we've had to make childcare decisions. We don't have kids yet because we can't afford them. And so we've talked a lot about how this issue around that the Secretary Clinton, one of the major issues we were voting on as a couple was around family medical leave, paid childcare, and making sure that there was also a setup for him to be able to access health care and support as well through affordable health care. So I think as long as we can educate and advocate for these issues that support and promote humanity and undermine toxic masculinity, we'll get closer to freedom for everyone, which really should be the goal.
And I think in all of the conversations, women's rights, whatever, and racism, sexism, what is missing in our world today is that link that we all call our common humanity. That is the missing piece. You have a world where we've lost it. You know, whether it's a man looking at a woman in a situation like Mozambique where violence has been normalized, or in this country where racism is increasing in other parts of the world, the us versus them narrative is not just a narrative anymore, and it's also not just treating people on the basis of your stereotype of them, but over time, that treatment has caused them to look like the objects or subjects of their stereotypes, and we've lost it. So for those who have this deep-seated hate for women's empowerment, when they see strong women like us, like the guy today, he did not even see a little girl. He saw the object and the subject of his stereotype, a thing. And who is this thing? Excuse me for saying, to stand up in my face to talk.
Right.
But if he was thinking about, okay, we all share one thing, it's the life and the breath that we all, and the need to be in this space. And the more it gets worse, the more difficult it will be. And this is not a feminist thing, to the brothers who asked the question. It's not a women's issue anymore. It's degenerated into many different things. Yeah. And the way I tell people this is that we've lost it in our world because we do not have the open mind to see the common humanity in the other. So the way I dress, most times I come into this country and I'm at Homeland Security, and my dress is like she's a possible migrant. So I've gotten people insult me on the basis of the way I dress until they slide my passport, see everything, and then they go, oh my God, I'm so sorry. But why do we have to get to that place?
Yes.
Why do we have to get to the place where women will be mistreated and ill-treated on the basis of their skin color? You know, why do we have to? So, I'm just thinking out loud, because then I leave it for my colleagues, but whether you're feminist or not, you should feel something for humanity. And that is what is important, and that is the missing piece in our world today. The one thing that says, I see your humanity, do you see mine?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We are very grateful in this room for the work of all of you. And just very quickly, before we finish up, we want to know, how can religious and faith communities get more information about your work and best partner with you in your work? Yeah, sure.
Such a loaded question, because religious conflict is so intertwined with my work. I definitely think learning as much about the other would be extraordinarily beneficial.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, it's a good way to sort of end in terms of thinking about this question of bringing multiple voices in, right? And really thinking about the solidarity movements that have to happen in terms of women, peace, and security. So I think really just being open to having lots of conversations and having it in multiple ways, and particularly in terms of activism.
We need more people of faith, people of spirit in the media talking about these issues of morality and issues of righteousness at this time. And so I'm here to support anyone who wants to get trained to become a commentator, media influencer, because we need you driving the narrative and taking and reclaiming it to talk about moral truth.
I would say that, the church has always been sort of like the Underground Railroad for the movement, and it shall remain that. Hopefully it will remain that. And so I'm always in the church building and, trying to utilize the resources of people of faith to really use their privilege, because it is a privilege to have that knowledge and to have sort of your institutional structure, to use that to help with the front lines of the movement. So I'm always open to that. I will say that, in our space, we also support the rights of trans people and LGBTQIA folks. And so if you are, a person of faith who somehow wants to oppress a Black trans woman, then, we may not be able to work together. Just going to put it that way nicely. So I think, we have to, be able to look beyond some of the things that sort of divide us. And as you said, find that common thread. And I can't not say to the gentleman who asked the question, how do we convince other people? When Sandra Bland died, or was whatever happened to her, I'll say she was killed, but that's a whole different story. For a traffic light, there were people who kept saying to me, I hear you, but how can you convince the other people who may not understand what they saw that her life was valuable? That's really what they were asking. And I would tell them all the time, it's not my job. So as a woman, it is not my job to convince the other half, the men who need to become feminists or whatever. It is your job. Since you are saying that that is what you believe and that's who you are, then it is your job to take the tools and go into communities with other men and try to help them get to the space where they need to be.
I have a theory. I believe that the state of any society is a reflection of its religious institution. And if this theory is true, and because I'm a Christian, I'll take it from that perspective, that the church, my work is to promote humanity. And I'm not looking for partnership with the church, because the church taught me everything that I know, meaning Christ. And so if the church must help to transform society, because everything we do is towards the end goal of transforming society and the rights of individuals, then the church needs to begin to change the language around discrimination, around women's rights, around violence against women. The first time I go to the Riverside Church when I'm in New York and heard a pastor preach about domestic violence. I've been to many places, this was the first time. And in religious institutions, women suffer the most violence. So for them to be able to do what we are doing, it's time for them to live their truth. Because society is waiting for religious institutions to take the lead. We see all this upside down politics because it's in the churches. We see all this increased racism because the church has not. So if you don't remember anything I said for the night, I believe firmly without a doubt that the state of any society is a reflection of its religious institution.
Wow.
Thank you to Leymah, Tamika, Jamia, Michaela, and Tanya for a wonderful conversation and allowing us to eavesdrop on your brilliance. Let's give them a warm welcome. final words are simply that if you enjoyed tonight's program and the experience, please do take a look at the April 20th program with Reverend Dr. William Barber, and join us once again, and be sure to check those updates online. Thank you and have a great evening.